Hey folks, and welcome. This is Natural Defensive Tactics. I'm your host, Joe Calderon again. Episode 10. In 3.5 months, I didn't even know I had that much knowledge in this little head of mine. But this is episode 10 already, and thank you for joining us. Today's episode is going to be something that's very special to me, edge weapons. This is a bench-made folder knife, tactical knife that I carry, and I want you to be able to have some ability to understand how to use gross motor skills against a knife attack. Now, having said that, there's a disclaimer. Because I carry this, I don't use it as a weapon, obviously. It's a great tool, but more importantly, of the 15,000 murders that happened, I think it was 2017 or 2018 FBI reports, about 1,600 of them were stabbings to death, okay, to death. So you're talking about 10%, maybe a little over 10% of the murders in this country were afflicted by a knife or some sort of edge weapon device. So I think it's something that we can talk about today and maybe learn from. So let's talk about knife defense. Again, like I said, I've got a little bit of experience in this, but more importantly, I've taught knife defense for many, many years. Many seminars, and there's a few assumptions we have to make. The first assumption is if you get in a situation, always treat the person with the blade, the edge weapon, as if they know what they're doing. They may not be an expert, but guess what? You're in their world in this moment, okay? So always assume that. The second thing is it may get a little messy. It may get a little nasty. Know that may happen. Don't be surprised by that, okay? And the third thing is you will survive this thing, okay? You will survive. You'll prevail. Got to have that mindset. Put aside that fear and push through, okay? With those assumptions, the overall strategy on dealing with an edge weapon is the 3 C's. Now, I call it the run 3 C's because if you can run, escape, that's your best option, period. Why even put yourself in that situation? But let's say you're cornered, elevator, it could be a thousand scenarios I can come up with, but you're cornered and that run option is not viable at that moment. You've got to do something. And the 3 C's is to clear. That means to stay out of the distance of the weapon, right, the edge blade. If you can't clear, then you're going to have to control the weapon, whether that's grabbing his arm, grabbing his wrists, pinning it to him, trapping it against his hip or your hip, something. And the third thing is now you have to counter. Now that you've controlled the weapon, what do you do now, right? And in another seminar, I could go into each one of those things, and that's why you're paying the big bucks, is to learn those concepts. But in this series, this episode, we're just going to say, if you can't run, clear it. Try your best to control it and then counter, okay? And we'll develop some of those principles here in a second. The other thing is you've got other options. Think outside the box. You're cornered. You're going to have to use some sort of improvised weapon on your end, and that could be that rolled up magazine. It could be your hot cup of coffee, remember that, your cup of joe. It could be your iPhone. It could be your jacket. Whatever weapons you can grab or have in your hand at that time, use. Always use. The concept of watching their hands. So if a person has a blade and they're not concealing, it's out in the open, you got to watch their hands. You're not no longer watching feet and hands and looking at their center torso or their eyes. You've got to fixate on the actual weapon in hand. So focus on the hands, okay? The third thing is strike first, right? You may have to strike first. The knife comes out, backs you up into the corner of the elevator and asking for your wallet. Hey, give him your wallet, right? But if you know this is not going to end well, and there's going to be a lot of, the hair on the back of your neck's going to raise a little bit, you may have to strike first. You may have to throw those multiple, minimum of 3 strikes at him, right? Or her. It doesn't really matter. The other thing is the 2v1 concept. That's 2 hands versus 1 hand. The advantage you have, and you may not think it's an advantage, but it is if he has a weapon, all his attention is on the weapon. It's a threatening device, right? It could be lethal or non-lethal at the same time. The advantage you have is I've got two hands, right, to fight against that one hand of his. And it is an advantage. Treat is one. The last thing is the way this individual carries the knife is very important. And so to give you I'm going to try to give you in about 2 minutes what I teach in a weekend course, okay? So this is called the forward grip, we'll call it, okay? Could be the hammer or saber grip, multiple names. It extends your reach, right? And then this forward grip, typically you can slash, right? But they do what we call stab, right? They stab, right? So in prison, they got those shanks, and they're called pit tactics, prison inmate tactics. They'll just stab you, stab you, stab you until you bleed out, okay? So in the forward range, they're typically gonna stab. And guess where they're gonna stab? Well, the vital areas are from the neck down. They don't usually stab at the head. That's a hard skull, right? Now in the movies I know they stab everywhere, but not typically to the head. So when you're fighting a knife, you're watching their hands, and your attention is a circular pattern if they're in a forward grip, which means this area here, really from the groin to the neck. That's all I'm going to defend. That's all I'm going to defend, right? And when I defend that, I'm not going to give them my wrists. I'm going to kind of defend it with kind of my ulna, okay? Kind of like that outside 90. So instead of giving them this, I'll give them that. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm fighting a circular pattern, knowing the odds are he's going to try to stab me instead of slash me. Okay? In the reverse grip, which is easier to conceal, right? You can walk and not see it, or the ice pick grip we call it. It's much difficult to stab the torso, right? You've got to take your arm and turn it sideways. So when someone holds a knife like this, they're either going to come down on you, come across this direction, all the way to about 90 degrees, and then it gets uncomfortable. Same thing with if they start coming down on this side, they're going to actually expose their shoulder and their back. So you know it's coming from this side. So when we would teach knife defense, when the ice pick grip comes out, you want to defend on your side that haymaker punch area. This quadrant from about here to about 90 degrees. So that's where your focus is. Again, watching their hands, watching their hands. So to recap, if they're holding it forward, it's a circular defense. It's most likely going to stab. Now they can slash, and ice pick, they're most likely going to come in from this direction unless they show their back. That makes sense. All right, so hopefully that gives you some idea on how to defend, or have an idea how to defend against a knife. There are many systems out there, but all the systems I know that seem to be very, very effective are the ones that rely on the gross motor skills. You can Google knife attacks on YouTube, and you can see the different knife attacks. They're pretty barbaric, almost caveman. You can see the person extending down. You can see them stabbing. A lot of systems, so the system I belong to, we hold it forward, we stay close, we stab, and then we slash. We stab and slash. So it's very difficult to defend against. Also, in the system I belong to, we attack tendons and ligaments and areas that we know you can't defend, right? So when you're up against an expert, if you don't have a good pair of shoes, it's going to be a short day for you. I'll just say that. So just to recap, in the forward grip, a circular pattern. In the ice pick grip, a quadrant, okay? A quadrant pattern, okay? I think that's it. I appreciate your time today. Hopefully you learned a little bit about knife defense. Um, the concept of clear, control, and counter are very important, and maybe in other episodes I'll talk about how to trap a weapon and things like that, but I just want to give you the academic side behind it today. So thank you for joining us for natural defensive tactics.